Sure. So the webcam is not.
This is
Yes, that's what I'm asking. Will I be? I mean, can I see myself?
you can see.
Okay. All right. Hello. My name is Ashish, and we're going to be doing a session on verbal reasoning today. So we're just going to have a buffer time of I think 3-4 minutes, post which we're going to be starting the session. So okay, so firstly, to start off with a brief intro about myself, I am in my first year in MBA, studying in NMIMS in Mumbai. I gave my NMAT along with all the other competitive exams into 2018. I scored a pretty good 236 in my NMAT. So yeah, I think I'd given like two attempts. One I had got 222, one was 236. And verbal was my stronger area amongst the three. And yeah, so the topic that we're going to be doing today mainly revolves around drawing inferences from the questions that are given from certain facts. Also, they're going to involve an element of providing arguments in support or in favor of or against the facts given in the question. So I think we can start off with the first question. The first question, okay, so how we're going to do is I think we have 32 questions total in your verbal section in NMAT, and we're going to be having 22 minutes for the entire section. So that gives you around 41 seconds per question. So I think the best way to deal with this timing is to spend around 15 to 20 seconds first reading the question properly, because a lot of your answers and the way you go about eliminating options, it depends on how well you've understood the question, and only then you can skim through the options basically, because you'll once you start reading the options, you'll automatically you'll do a form of speed read, and it'll be easier to eliminate the wrong options. Okay, so starting with the first one, I think we can just take around 15 seconds to just go through this question, understand what it's about, and then we can proceed to look at the options. Okay, so here the question is basically being talked about how the country's parliament is, proposing to deal with the defeated rebels, right? So it's saying that one side proposed that all the rebels be imprisoned in order to deter those who might be strongly tempted to rebel in the future. So what they're saying is just basically imprison everyone, and the subsequent effect that they think it will have is nobody else will be tempted to rebel in the future. The other side was saying that okay, don't rebel them because it would only discourage future insurrectionists or future rebellions from surrendering. So now the question that they're asking is that both positions logically depend on the assumption that. So now here, the two sides that we have, both of them are saying the opposite thing, but both of them are predicated on one logical point, right? So let's just go through the options one by one so we can come to an understanding. So the first one is imprisonment is a harsh penalty, which is basically true, which is what it's being said. So this seems like the right option, but we'll still look at the other options as well. The second one reads that a rebel will prefer a sentence of imprisonment to death. Now, this hasn't been really referenced anywhere in the question, so I don't think it's this is the right option. There will be no future rebellion in country. Again, out of context, out of scope. The fourth one reads that it is unlikely that future rebels will surrender. Now, this is a point that is pretty contradictory on the sides. That you know the future rebels, they, the reason why they don't want to imprison them is because they think that it would only discourage future rebels. And the fifth one reads that a rebellion can be put down by force. So, of the five options, the logical point, which is that imprisonment is a harsh penalty, this is the point that both the arguments are based on. So that's why the first option would be the right option. All right, moving on to the next one. So again, we're going to take about 15 seconds, and after that we can go and read the options. This is a smaller question, so it shouldn't take that much of time. Okay, so here it's pretty clear that it's an analogy question, and the two pairs that are being compared are the enzyme and the substrate with the lock and key. So what they're saying is the relationship between enzyme and substrate is like the relationship between a lock and a key. So for one specific lock, there is only one specific key. So they're establishing a one is to one kind of a relation. And what it also says is that no enzyme is an all-purpose tool, right? So basically, any enzyme can't work on any substrate, is what they're saying here. Okay, so now we have to identify which of these which of these options is the correct way to go about it. Right. So starting from the first option, an enzyme acts only upon a specific substrate, and it is not an all-purpose tool, which is a correct statement. Okay, but these they represent the relationship between two sub-items of each group. But that's not what the question is asking. They're not asking that do they both represent the relationship between the two sub-items or how they're related. It is how enzyme and substrate are related to the key and lock, right? So if you refer to the part that just as each key acts upon only upon a specific lock, so each enzyme acts only upon a specific substrate. Okay, so we go to the third option, and then enzyme acts only upon a specific substrate and it is a key. Again, this wouldn't be correct. The fourth and fifth option, let's have a look at them as well. A key acts only upon a specific lock and it is an all-purpose tool. Just by the fact when they're saying it's an all-purpose tool, it's sort of negating the assumption made earlier. I'm sorry, negating the statement given earlier. The fifth one reads the key acts only upon a specific lock and it is not an all-purpose tool. So this is also a correct statement. So 1 and 5 are both the correct statements, and what they're saying is both these statements are using the same analogy, the key lock and the enzyme and substrate. So option 2 would be the correct answer. Moving on to the next one. So here, what is being said is that the United States advertising agencies are increasingly using interviews at shopping malls called mall intercepts to test for advertising effectiveness. So what they're doing basically here is that they're speaking to people in the mall, and in order to conduct some research, and what they're saying is that critics of mall intercepts maintain that shopping habits of mall shoppers are not representative of those of the larger populations. Okay. So what the critics are saying is that when you take the sample set of people in the malls, right, it is not completely reflective of the larger population, and this is the viewpoint of the critics. And the question is being asked that which of the following arguments most strengthens this viewpoint. Okay. So accordingly, we need to have a look at the options. First one says that some mall shoppers patronize more than one mall in any given shopping trip. So again, this doesn't seem to be the right one, because it's there's nowhere being talked about which malls are being patronized by the shoppers. We go to the second one, which says mall shoppers on average spend 50% more time shopping than shoppers at other locations do. Okay, so this talks about the habits of the mall shoppers and how they differ, uh, how they differ compared to the other shoppers, the mall shoppers and the other shoppers. So the mall shoppers, they're saying they spend 50% more time shopping than shoppers at other locations. So this seems to be the right one. We'll still have a look at the other options as well. The third one says that in the course of any year, 95% of all households in the United States have at least one member who does some shopping at a mall. So here, what they're saying is they're actually strengthening the case. They're not strengthening, they're weakening the case of the critics. They're saying that 95% of all households have a member who actually goes to the mall to shop, right? So which is not what they're saying. They're saying that the mall shoppers are not representative of the entire set. So this option doesn't seem to be the right one. Fourth one says mall shoppers who use public transportation to reach the mall tend to have lower incomes. That again, when an option is talking about something which is way too out of context, which is not mentioned in the question statement, it's your safe bet to leave these questions out, leave these options out. The fifth one says that many mall shoppers indulge in window shopping. Again, it's not in the purview of the question. It's not in the scope of the question. So the right option here is the second one. If you guys have any doubts about any of the questions, after every question I'll just give a small gap of around 10-15 seconds, and you can type in your doubts, and I'll try to answer as many of them as possible, because there are, I think, 25 questions that we need to get through. So keeping the time constraints in mind, we'll try to answer as many doubts as possible. Okay, so let's go for the fourth question now. We'll just have a look at it. Fishes such as suckers, shiners, and chubs are neither fun to catch nor good to eat. They should be eliminated from mountain pond to make way for trout. Fish and Game Commissioner says that the state's policy is to preserve any aquatic ecosystems that are indigenous to a given area. Interfering with fish population in these ponds would violate this policy. Okay. So now there's two point of views stated here. Points of view. I'm sorry. One is from the angler and one is from the commissioner. What the angler is saying that there's certain categories of fishes, suckers, shiners, and chubs, which he proposes to eliminate from the pound so that they can make way for trout, which are, in his opinion, more fun to catch and obviously more delicious. What the commissioner is saying that the state's policy is that we have to prevent any aquatic ecosystems and indigenous aquatic ecosystems from any kind of damage, to preserve them. So interfering with fish population in these ponds would violate this policy. So the stances are pretty clear now. Now the question says that which of the following, if true, would cast most doubt on the Fish and Game Commissioner's position that the angler's proposal is a violation of state policy. Okay, so now what they're asking is that as per this question, the Fish and Game Commissioner's position is against the angler's proposal, right? But which of the statements in the options is going to act as a negative effect on the commissioner's position? So basically, commissioner has taken a stance, but which of these statements weaken this stance is what we have to find out. So now we start reading the options. The first option says that the sucker shiners in mountain ponds are brought to those ponds by anglers for use as bait in catching the once abundant trout. So now in this option, the part to focus on is that uh, they're saying that these fishes are brought to these ponds by anglers. Okay, so that completely eliminates the point of being indigenous. Indigenous means belonging from that area itself. But when they're saying that these fishes are actually, imported from other areas, so this is sort of weakening the Fish and Game Commissioner's policy, because the policy is to preserve indigenous species of the area. And as per option one, the species suggested by the angler are not indigenous; they've been imported. So it is weakening the commissioner's argument. So this seems to be the right one, but again, we need to go through all the options. So the second one says that state's policy of preserving natural aquatic systems favors the interests and hobbies of one group of people over those of other groups. Again, not really relevant. It's not in the purview of this question. There's no talks of groups and their interests and hobbies. So we can safely ignore this. The third one says that they're dull, unattractive fishes with none of the graceful beauty as of a trout. Pretty easy to eliminate this option as well. Irrelevant. Anglers never visit the ponds, whereas people who are fond of nature always do. It does not add to, it does not cast any doubt on the gaming commissioner's position. The fifth one, in the past, there have been many exceptions to the state policy. Now, this could, be a little confusing. This one may seem like the right statement, because what they're saying is there have been exceptions in the state policy in the past, right? But at the same time, the state policy clearly states that it's about the indigenous species. Okay, so this one is, even though it may seem right, it's not a complete answer. The first one is more of a complete answer. So that's why that would be the right answer. If there's any doubts, please feel free to post them, and we'll do our best to answer them. Okay. So now this question says that, as per the theory of moon's origin, the Earth, which was a rapidly rotating body of molten rock, in which most of the iron had settled to the core. Some of this fluid was cast off from the surface of the spinning mass and later solidified to form the moon. Right. So, which of the following statements can be most directly inferred from the above? Now, when they say directly inferred, it automatically means that you don't have to make any extra assumptions. It's what can be directly taken from the passage. The points that are given, the statements that are made, what are the most clear uh, sort of inferences or things that you can draw from that passage. Okay, so let's see the options. The first one says the moon is the only sizable heavenly body in orbit around the Earth. Again, it's not directly inferred. Nowhere is it talking about all the heavenly bodies in orbit around the Earth. So this seems out of the purview. The second one says moon has proportionally less iron at its core than the Earth does. So now the Earth could not have actually cast off much of the iron in the formation of the moon, as the iron was actually lying at the Earth's core, right? So this option is not really the right one. Third one says the surface of moon solidified after the surface of the Earth did. Again, the timing of the solidification is it's making an assumption basically. It's not really an inference. Most of the fluid cast off from the Earth was dispersed into outer space. This is clearly wrong because it's clearly said that some of this fluid was cast off from the surface. So this option doesn't work as well. All matter on Earth in its early stage of development was in a liquid state. Now this is the option that we can actually look at because it's clearly stated that the Earth was actually a body of molten rock, which is in the liquid state. So this as an option would make more sense. This would be the right option in this particular scenario because it can be directly inferred from the question, right? So moving on to the next one. Right. So this is an interesting question because in this question, it's the tone is a little sarcastic in a way, and we basically have to understand what exactly are they trying to say within sort of reading between the lines. Right. So what they're saying is that despite the system in hospitals having repeatedly failed, we still have been made to expect good services, and this means asking for something as basic as prompt treatment for an accident victim. So it's pretty clear what they're saying is that the system in the hospital is not that good. It's not efficient, and when we're saying good services, it does not mean anything exceptional. It means even the most basic services, such as prompt treatment for the accident victim, even asking for that seems like a lot, right? So now we have to straight away go to the options. When the question statement is very small, it's you shouldn't spend a lot of time rereading it again and again. You should read it quickly and then move on to the options, because here the options are actually reading the options, spending more time on the options are actually going to help you get the right answer. So what they're saying is what may be inferred from the above statement. The first one says that it would be a surprise if the accident victims are treated, as they are generally not treated. Right. So here, this is basically on similar lines of what the question is saying, that if the accident victims are given prompt treatment, that would be a surprise because the hospital has been known to not even get that done properly. So this does seem like the right option. We'll still go ahead and read the others. Hospitals have improved their services and will thereby be more efficient too. Never not mentioned in the passage. So it's not the right one. We should not lose hope in the system just because of its. We should not lose hope in the system, as it will take some more time for the services to become good. Again, it's too out of context here. It's not in the scope of the question. We cannot expect the hospital services to give treatment to accident victims because these become police cases. There's no mention of any police cases here. Again, way out of context. Public hospital system has failed to deliver good services, and there is no hope that it can treat accident victims properly now or even in the distant future. So now here, even though this option is right, but this is where you have to pay attention, and this is the part where you really need to focus on, because now or even in the distant future is an additional part. It's not been mentioned in the question. It's just a part that they've added from their end. Okay, so just because of this, you can ignore this option. Whenever any extra information is given outside of the question, it's safe to ignore it. So that makes the first one the right option. Moving on to the next one. So these kind of questions are mainly where you're given two points of view, and mostly they're going to be conflicting. So you have to read them first, understand what is the sort of the bone of contention, what is the point that they differ on, and then move on to the option and try to understand which one can you eliminate. The easy way to do these problems is to do these questions is through the process of elimination, but that only comes after a certain level of practice, after you become fairly acquainted with the kind of questions, and you know you can divide your time pretty well. So moving on to this question, they're saying that the speaker says that a great majority of people in the city have access to the best medical care available anywhere in the world. And the opposition is saying that there are thousands of poor in the city who cannot afford to pay to see a doctor. Right. So these are pretty conflicting statements. What they're mainly talking about is how many people can afford to pay to see a doctor. Right. So which of the following is true of the opposition's comment? So now we have to focus on the opposition's comment. What they're saying is, the first one says that it constitutes a hasty generalization of a few options. Second says that it cites statistical evidence which tends to corroborate the views of the speaker, which it doesn't. There's no statistical evidence mentioned here. So this one can be ignored. Tries to compare unrelated data and draws a contrary conclusion. It's not really comparing any data. Of course, there is a contrary conclusion, but there's no comparison of data. It is not necessarily inconsistent with the speaker's remarks. It is pretty differing from the speaker. The speaker is saying that people do get access. A lot of people have access. Majority of the people have access. Opposition is saying that there's thousands of poor in the city who cannot afford. So it is inconsistent. It pinpoints the contradiction in the speaker's comment. Okay, so this also does seem like the right option. So what we have to focus on that because the minority might consist of thousands of people, the opposition might not be inconsistent with the speaker's remark. Okay. Okay, hold on. Let's just have a look at this again. A great majority may have. Right. Okay. So here, what they're saying is that great majority may have, even though they may have access to the facilities, but the minority itself comprises of of thousands of people. Right. So the fourth option is not necessarily inconsistent with the speaker's remarks. This, I think, would be the most appropriate option in this case, because again, even though there's thousands of people, they still form the minority in the city, right? So this seems to be the right option. Okay, so the next one is a continuation of the last question. It's just a different problem statement here. So what they're saying is a possible objection that opposition could have fielded to the speaker's comments would be to point to the existence of dash, right? So the speaker statement, as we already know, is that what he's saying is that great majority of people in the city have access to medical care. Now, to counter this statement, to object this statement, the best possible option is to provide provide the example of a city which has better medical care. And when we say better medical care, that automatically, when we give an example of such a city, that automatically negates this point. So let's go through the options and try to figure out which one fits best. The first one says a city which has more doctors than this city. Uh, that does seem like a fair point. It proves to the better medical care part. It cites statistical evidence which tends to corroborate the views of the speaker. Does not fit in. There's no statistical evidence being provided. A city which has higher per capita hospital beds than this city. Hospital beds are they do indicate that medical facilities are advanced here, so we can still consider this. The amount spent on medical insurance for people of this city. Um, this Yeah, so this one doesn't really fit in because again, when we're talking about medical insurance, it's not in the purview of the question. There has been no mention of that. Fifth one says corresponding fall in the quality of medical care. So this is not really countering the argument about the number of people who have access to medical care. It's just talking about the quality of medical care. So here the first option seems to be the best one, because it's giving an example of a city which has more doctors than this city. So that could be a objection that the opposition can raise to the speaker. So the first one would be the right option in this case. Right. So now these kind of questions, they tend to take a little bit more time because you have to first understand the reasoning given in the question, and then the options themselves are pretty long. So because each of them are like a example of a parallel reasoning, so you have to go through all of them. So it's very crucial to understand the reasoning given in the question, so that as soon as you read the options, you can instantly eliminate them. You don't have to actually reread them again, right? So just we can just have 10 seconds, 10-15 seconds to go through the question. Okay, so what they're saying is the right to vote under human conditions is a fundamental right of all people in India. Okay, so they've made like a broad set of all people in India, and they've pointed out that it's a right that every one of them have. Then they're narrowing it down to what does all people of India entail. So they're saying that therefore all men and women have the right to vote and are entitled to equal right in selecting the candidate. Okay, so now the the options that we are going to be reading, we have to pick the one that closely mirrors the reasoning that's given in the question, and let's have a look at them. The expression of fear is a natural instinct of all human beings who feel threatened. Therefore, Vipul is not to be blamed for expressing fear when he felt threatened. So now this statement, even though it may feel right at the first glance, but it's not talking about narrowing down from a big set and then coming down to the components of that set. So this doesn't seem like the right one. We can move on to the next one. Ronit is one of the most honest legislative leaders ever to serve the state. Therefore, Ronit could not have committed the dishonest acts of which he has been accused. Now, this is more of a causal relation that's being done here. They're trying to say that since he's an honest legislative leader, it's not possible for him to commit such crimes. It's not the kind of reasoning that's been done in the question, so we can ignore this. The Bill of Rights protects the free practice of religion in this country. Therefore, all people have the right to worship God in a manner of their own choosing. All right. So now this seems like a more appropriate answer because it's saying that protects the free practice of religion in this country. So it's including the largest subset of religion in this country, and therefore all people have the right to worship God in a manner of their own choosing. Right. So it's similar here to when they're saying all people in India, and therefore all women, men and women have a right to vote and are entitled to equal right. Okay, so this pretty much seems like the right option. Now, if you're pretty confident about which is the right option, you can maybe just run through the remaining options. But if you're sort of at the stage where you're still at the beginner level, it's better to actually go through all the options. So read we can just skim through the fourth and fifth one. Children are human beings who have the potential for adult behavior. Therefore, any right or privilege that is granted to adults in fairness ought to be in fairness to be granted to children as well. Again, this is clearly not the right one. Since queen bee contributes nothing to the collection of honey, all honey is collected by worker bees only. It's not at all similar to the reasoning. So it's pretty safe to say that the third one is the right answer. Okay, so now moving forward to this question. What they are asking is which of the following can be inferred from the above passage. Now, inferred automatically means something which is not stated outright, but which is implied, right? So it involves a certain reading between the lines. Okay. So what they're saying is Brahmin priest was expected to be able to recite at least one of the Vedas. This practice was essential for several centuries when the Vedas had not yet been written down. It must have had a selective effect, since priests would have been recruited from those able to or willing to memorize long passages. So they're saying that Vedas were not yet written down. That's why the priests had to memorize these passages so that they can recreate it again and again. They can rewrite it. It must have helped in the dissemination of the work, since a memorized passage can be duplicated many times. Okay, so the Vedic priest, would have had to had a good memory. Okay, so that and that comes from being able to recite all the Vedas, so that he can create and recreate the passages again and again, in order to be able to disseminate it to the larger public. Okay, so let's talk about the options now. Reciting the Vedas was a Brahmin's obligation. It's never said that it was an obligation. Sure, they were expected to be able to recite at least one of the Vedas. This doesn't seem like a great option. Second one is that Vedic priest was like a recorded audio cassette, which essentially was the purpose, right? Which was essentially what they were doing. They were repeating and rewriting the material again and again. So this can be in consideration. McNeil studied the behavior of Brahmin priests. This is stated, right? So according to McNeil, Brahmin priests was expressed. So it's clearly from a research that he's doing. So this option is not the right one. Vedic hymns had not been scripted. Again, there's no talk about hymns here. They're just talking about the Vedas. So this one is also not the right option. Vedas were the most important scriptures of the Hindus. Again, there's no mention of Hindus, and there's no mention of which were the other important scriptures. So this is again out of scope. The right option is second one. Right. So this one is a slightly longer question. We can take a little bit more time to go through this. Okay, so I have a question from Maitri Mehta. What was the answer for 10? The answer for 10 is option 2, Maitri, because like we said that here what we are inferring from the passage is that the Vedic priest was the role that he was playing here was mainly that of a recorded audio cassette, because he was essentially duplicating the material that he has memorized, that he has studied. He is by the fact that he has a good memory, he is able to recreate that material, and he is able to duplicate the entire memorized passage many times. So that's why he is more like an audio cassette, and that is what is being inferred from this passage. So the answer for the 10th one is second option. Yeah. So the doubt is here that why not three is the right option. Now, three, McNeil studied the behavior of Brahmin peace. This may this you may maybe you can infer this just based on the statement that according to McNeil, but this statement is not what the entire passage is about, right? McNeil mention has only come in once. The entire passage is talking about the Brahmin priest. It's talking about the Vedas, and it's talking about the culture that has been sort of propagated throughout the years, right? So what it's saying is that they were expected to be able to recite at least one of the Vedas. It's talking about what the role of the Brahmins were, what the role of the priests were, and what they were doing at that point of time. So that is why the third option can be safely discarded, because it's not really talking about the core of the problem statement. The second one, on the other hand, is giving you the clear analogy or the clear inference of what this passage is talking about. Okay, so moving on to the 11th one. Now, what they're saying here is in developed countries, there have been adequate provisions made for social security of senior citizens. Okay, uh, such as Medicare, pension benefits to people who can no longer earn. Now, the second part reads that in India, with the collapse of the joint family system, the traditional shelter of family is not in a position to provide social security. They're saying that mainly because there's of a lack of joint family system, there is not that much of social security, and India clearly is not a developed nation as of yet. It's still a developing country, right? So these are things that you need to keep in mind when you've read this much. Moving on to the last part, so it is advisable that the working population gives serious thought to building a financial base for itself, right? So now, for questions like this, the best way to go about it is to break it down into parts, break it down into sentences, and understand what each sentence is actually trying to say, right? So the first one is just talking about the existing scenario in developed countries, that there is provision for social security for senior citizens. You can safely ignore the details that offering Medicare and pension benefits. That's not really important. The second one saying that in India, what the scenario is, right? That because of the lack of joint families, they there is not that much of social security. And the third part is saying that it is advisable that the working population gives serious thought to building a financial base for itself to secure its own future. This is what it means. So, which of the following, if it were to happen, weakens the conclusion drawn in the above passage the most? So, like we again go back to the conclusion drawn here, it is saying that it is advisable that working population gives serious thoughts to building financial base for itself. This is the conclusion they've come to based on their reasoning, that in India being a developing country, there is no provision currently existing for social security for senior citizens, right? So, which of these options would weaken this conclusion a lot? So let's go through the options. The investable income of the working population as a proportion of its total income will grow in the future. This, yeah. So again, this option, sorry. So this option is not really again talking about the core problem here, which is uh, they're talking mainly about as a proportion of its total income will grow in the future, which is not really relevant to the problem statement given here. So we can safely ignore this option. The second one says that insurance sector is underdeveloped and trends indicate that it will be extensively privatized in the future. Way out of scope. There's no talk about privatization of the insurance sector and it being underdeveloped, and no talk of the trends. India is on a path of development that will take it to the status of a developed country with all its positive and negative implications. Okay, so now when someone makes this kind of a statement, right, focus on the important parts here. Here, what they're saying is India is on a path of development, which will take it to becoming a developed country. The only reason why India doesn't have adequate provisions for social security is because it's not yet a developed country. Okay, so this option, when it says that it will become a developed country with all its positive and negative implications, this is automatically weakening the conclusion that is being drawn here, that it is advisable that working population gives serious thought to build a financial base, because it's saying that we are already on the move, we are about to get there. uh, we are on the path of being a developed country. Okay, so we can shortlist this option, we go to the others. If the working population builds a stronger financial base, there will be a revival of the joint family system. If this statement is made, it's not exactly weakening the conclusion that's being drawn here. Conclusion is that the working population should build a financial base. They're talking about if they build a financial base, there will be revival of joint family system. How does that help the problem of social security? It doesn't. So we can ignore this option. The fifth one is, although the joint family system is on the decline, the value systems in India do not permit total abandonment of our elders, as is the case in certain developed countries. Again, this option may seem right in the sense that it is saying that even though social security doesn't exist, our culture system does not permit us to leave our abandon our elders. But at the same time, it is deviating too much from the main topic at hand, from the main problem at hand, which is about the social security and the reason why it doesn't exist. Okay, so in this case, the third option would be the right answer. Moving on to the next one. This is a slightly longer question. You should take around 20 seconds to read it properly. Understand that which are the elements that are being talked about here. Right. So let's go through the question once. Various studies have shown that our forested and hilly regions, and in general areas where biodiversity is high, are the places where poverty appears to be high. And these same areas are also the one where educational performance seems to be poor. So what they're doing is they're linking biodiversity with poverty and low level of education. So the link that they're establishing, now it's easy to get confused here, but the link that they're establishing is very important to understand. They are establishing the link between poverty and low level of education, but there is no such direct link between the educational background and biodiversity, right? So that is an important point to keep in mind. Now let's talk about the options here. Which of the following statements, if true, can be said to best provide supporting evidence for the surmise mentioned in the passage? The surmise is that even disregarding poverty status, richness in biodiversity goes hand in hand with educational backwardness, right? So what they're saying is, if biodiversity is high, the the education will be low, education backwardness will be high, so which basically means the education will be low. It's a direct link between educational backwardness and biodiversity, right? So now let's have a look at the options. The first one says that in regions where there is little variety in flora, educational performance is seen to be as good as in regions with high variety in flora where poverty levels are high. Now again, break it down into different parts. What they're saying is, when there is little variety in flora, where biodiversity is low. Educational performances seem to be as good as in regions with high variety in flora, where poverty levels are high. So it is not establishing a direct link between education level and biodiversity, right? So that is why this option can be eliminated. We go to the second one, which says that regions which show high biodiversity also exhibit poor educational performance at low levels of poverty. Now, the conclusion, the surmise here is saying that even disregarding the poverty status, right? So here, when they're specifying that it's at only at low levels of property, that automatically eliminates this option. Okay. Uh, we talk about the third option. In regions which show high biodiversity reveals high levels of poverty and poor educational performance. Again, it's specifying the level of poverty when it's clearly saying disregarding the poverty status. So you can again ignore this one. The fourth one says that in regions where there is low biodiversity at all levels of poverty. Now this and this are a clear match. Education performance is seen to be good. Does this fit in with the link that we have drawn here, the link that they have drawn here, that biodiversity when it is high, education is low, and biodiversity subsequently when it's low, education is seen to be good. So this is supporting the statement. So it's clearly the right option, and we can move on to the next one. If any doubts, you can still post them. I will come back to this one if there are any doubts. Okay, so this one is slightly more on of a mathematical. Not really a lot of mathematics is used, but it does involve a simple or simple, I would say, calculation. Not even a calculation, just a relation. What they're saying is a 10-year comparison between India and China in terms of crop yields per acre revealed that when only planted acreage is when only planted acreage is compared, Chinese yields are equal to 60% of India yields. So they are talking about two different kinds of acreages here. One is the planted acreage, one is the fallow acreage. When you add them both, you get the total acreage, right? So if you're just considering planted acreage, they're saying Chinese yields are equal to 60% of India yields, which means that India's planted acreage yields are higher than China's. But then when we talk about total agriculture acreage, Chinese yield is 110% of India's yield, which means that now the additional component, which is of the fallow acreage, if you just consider that, that is higher than for China, that is higher than that of India's, which makes the total acreage also higher than India's yield, right? So it's a relatively simple, mathematical derivation. We talk about the question from the information above, which of the following can be most reliably inferred about India and Chinese agriculture. Now, the important thing to note here is that nowhere we are told about the total area or total fallow area in India or China. Okay, we're just talking about the yields. So now, if we just go through if we just go through the options, that a higher percentage of total agriculture acreage was fallow in India than in China. This one does seem to be the right one because it's talking about from the total agricultural acreage. Uh, a higher percentage was fallow in India than in China, right? So this is clearly establishing the same kind of link that is being mentioned here. That obviously India has more fallow area as compared to China, because only this would yield to a higher result. Sorry, only this would be yielding higher results. right? So this is the first. So the first one seems to be the right one. So we can just mark it. Let's read the other ones as well. India had more fallow acreage than planted acreage. This has not really been outright mentioned, and it cannot be very reliably inferred. So we can ignore this option. Uh, we're talking about then the third one, we're talking about fewer total acres of available agricultural land were fallow in China than in India. Again, total acres for China or for India have not been mentioned. So this option can be ignored. Fourth is China had more planted acreage than fallow acreage. Now, this is clearly wrong because they've clearly said that when only planted acreage is compared, Chinese yields are 60% of India yields, and when you add the element of fallow acreage, then their yield goes up. So how can the planted acreage be more than the fallow acreage? So that is why this one is also wrong. Fifth one says that China had greater land mass than India. At this point only, I think you should stop because there's no mention of any land mass, and it's clearly outside the scope of the question. So the right option here would be option one. Okay. Fourth one, 14th one. Let's just take some time to again go through this. I would just require a break of 2 minutes. There's just one urgent call that I have to attend to. Yeah, really sorry for that. Just had an urgent call. Right, so let's get back to the 14th one. What they're saying here is that the changes made in format of engineering journal are nothing but a myopic move. Myopic is a very short-sighted, short-term move by the management. So by adding a new section, books for professional readers, opposite to the present section, books for enjoyment, the editors think that uh, generate they will generate interest in the research and development that is taking place in the industry. So what the management here is doing is that they're separating the professional readers, the section for professional readers, with that of the enjoyment or more of light reading. Uh, it's the batteries. See charger. Yeah. So the question is that what they're saying is that this will increase readership, which is the intent why they're doing this. But that is not the case. The titles of the two sections suggest that the research literature is not enjoyable reading. So once you separate the two, once you're clearly saying, okay, this is enjoyable reading, and this is the more serious section, focused more on professional readers. So automatically you're alienating the professional readers from the enjoyable reading section, and that will have a negative impact. That will repel the monthly's readers from reading the professional material. So audience will be less interested in the research articles and less able to distinguish serious research from some, like they're saying, new offbeat ideas. And the editors of the monthly could have done a better job by maintaining status quo. So, according to the author, which of the following conclusions will the journal draw from the editor's change of the book review format? Now, what they're asking is, as per this, if we consider this to be true, what would be the impact, or how would the readers see this move by the journal, right? So let's go through the options. The first one says that editors are attempting to stimulate the market for the magazine. This so now this option is slightly out of scope because it's talking about stimulating the market for the magazine, where then no such mention has been made, and it is taking it in a different context. So we can ignore this one. Books reviewed in books for professional will tend not to be enjoyable reading. Now this is more along the lines of what is being stated in the passage, because what they're saying is they're talking about not enjoyable reading. The titles of the two sections suggest that research literature is not enjoyable reading because they've separated it from the entertainment section or the casual section. The third one says, so this we can shortlist it for now. The third one says that a reader of serious literature has more discriminating tastes than other readers. Not in the purview of the statement, they're not talking about the tastes of any readers. A reader can enjoy serious literature as well as popular literature. Had that been the case, there would have been no need to separate the two. There is a different niche market for the two types, way out of scope. So clearly, the option two is the right one over here. Right. So moving on to the 15th one, it's saying that calcified bones marked with scratches other than tooth marks were discovered in Harappa excavations near some tools. This was used as evidence that the residents used stone tools because bones were scratched using similar tools. The resulting scratches resembled the scratches found on the fossils, right? So therefore, stone tools had probably been used on the animal bones that became calcified. So now here the argument that they're trying to make is that from the fact that the bones scratched with similar tools produce scratches similar to those found on fossils, the author is arguing that the stone tools had been used on bones that eventually became fossilized, right? So to weaken this argument, what we could do is to counter the only evidence given in support of the conclusion, which has been that we have. So if we can just go through the option ones, the calcified bones with scratches are not as old as nearby found calcified bones found to have tooth marks. Uh, this one doesn't seem like the right one. because it's not exactly countering the argument that has been made here. Periodic earth movements can produce scratches on buried bones that are similar to those on the fossils. Now, this is giving you an alternative reasoning, right? And whenever an alternative reasoning is given to any argument, to the reasoning behind any argument, it can seriously undermine that, right? So that is why this one can be shortlisted. This one is a closer option. Third one says that stone tools have been found in areas where nearby calcified bones were not scratched. Uh, the stone tools were too hard to be scratched by animal bones is again out of context. Some carnivores use their paws, not their teeth, to tear the flesh away is again not really in context. Uh, the stone tool, yeah. So now over here, the second option, which is clearly saying that the scratches were not necessarily made by stone tools, right? So it is clearly undermining the argument that is being proposed here. So that is why it's the right one. Okay, so just have a look at the 16th one. Okay, so coming to the 16th one. Now, in these kind of questions, they're slightly more tricky because you have to actually go through all the options, then try to understand which one fits best. A lot of times, what happens is, uh, you know, more than one of them may seem like the right one, and that's why you may be tempted to select, options which state that only three or multiple of these statements follow the assumption. But it's very important to actually figure out exactly what is being said here. So what they're saying is, according to CPCB, topping list of the worst offenders are Maharashtra, UP, Tamil Nadu, with Sikkim at the bottom. With garbage spilling onto our streets, improper dumping can lead to issues such as contamination of water and the air, blockage of drains, spread of diseases. The waste, if collected and treated, can be effectively used to generate clean energy. Pretty simplistic statement. Okay. So, which of the following is an assumption that can be drawn from this passage? Now, we're talking about assumptions here. So, number one says that there is a proper waste disposal system in India. People just do not use it properly. Now, this one, it doesn't seem to be the right answer because they're saying that there already exists a proper waste disposal system, which has nowhere been mentioned, and the kind of state that they've given, where there is a rampant existence of improper dumping, contamination, blockage of drains. It clearly points that there is no proper waste disposal system in place. Second one says that energy produced from waste will compensate the cost of machinery required to generate clean energy from it. Now it's talking about the cost of the machinery and the energy produced from the waste is going to be compensating to that. So again, it's not really an assumption that can be drawn from this passage. Third one says human resource required to generate energy is easily available in India. Okay, so now the suggestion that they're making here is, the if the waste is collected and treated, it can be effectively used to generate clean energy. Okay, For this, the assumption at hand would be that they are assuming that human resources, we have enough human resources, and they're easily available to generate this energy, right? So that is why this one would be a more appropriate choice. Whereas in the fourth and fifth one, if we talk about in Sikkim, people do not just buy and throw things, instead they buy as per their demands. Uh, it may be true, but it's again way too out of scope. They're making too many assumptions in the assumption itself. So this one can be ignored. The fifth one says that only process of energy production from waste is equally efficient as energy production from water. There's no talk of efficiency here, so this assumption again doesn't really reflect well. So only three is the one that follows. We can move on to the next one. Okay, so the 17th one says that. Okay, so let's break the problem statement down. They're talking about the startup policy, which is aimed at boosting enterprise creation and generating employment. But what they're saying is that the coverage of this policy is very skewed because 98% of the total funding is going to startups located in six cities. So it's like the majority of the resources are being distributed to very select few outlets. So this is creating like a disbalance and that is why the number of jobs created is high only in these regions, but the remaining regions there is still a big gap that can be filled. Okay, so now let's talk about the assumptions. The first one says that there are many emerging startups that are located out of the six cities. So this statement can actually be inferred from the start because it's talking about there are a lot of startups present in the country. It's just that the funding is going only to a very select few. It's only concentrated in a few regions. So the first one is an assumption that we can infer. Second one says that apart from being in the six cities, there are people in the nations who are seeking opportunities. Now, this again is it can be easily inferred because when we're talking about leaving the potential of an otherwise vast nation almost untapped, this what this statement means is that there is a lot of potential in the country. There are a lot of other people seeking jobs, and just because of this skewed nature, they are not able to get these jobs. So obviously, the second one can be inferred that there are other people in the country apart from these six cities who are also seeking employment. Okay. The third one says that there is a major problem of unemployment in the country. So now this one is also implicit. So it's I mean the overarching problem statement here where there is a problem of unemployment, and to battle that itself, the Startup India policy has been created. So here the right answer would be one because all of them are implicit. Okay, so the 18th one, yeah, this is a short question, so we should try to finish it fast. So here the important phrases to look at are quality of death, right? Autonomy in our healthcare choices. What this actually means is they're saying a lot of patients would prefer natural deaths to being stuck in an ICU or to being stuck in a hospital, right? So they're saying that astonishingly, we as Indian citizens have no right to autonomy in our healthcare choices. So even if a patient would prefer a natural death, he has no autonomy to decide that. He does not have any control over that. If he's in a hospital, the doctor has to take care of him, has to deliver the treatment. So let's look at the question. They're saying the argument above requires which of the following assumptions, right? So let's have a look at the options. Most Indian healthcare professionals are never trained to recognize and respond to end of life care needs. This is not really the right option here because it's talking about the training given to healthcare professionals and their need to respond to life care needs, which is again outside the purview of this question. So we can ignore this. Our constitution gives us liberty, which is just a political concept. There's no mention of a political scenario here. Safe to ignore this. As of now, a doctor's legal duty is to make every attempt to save life, even if it means disregarding the patient's clear instructions to allow natural death. Here it's talking about the quality of that and autonomy in our healthcare choices. If the patient clearly does not want medical treatment, even then, it is the doctor's legal duty to make every attempt to save his life, which is where the question of not having autonomy comes in, right? So, this is an assumption which can be shortlisted. Fourth one says that technology obviously more profitable, but even government hospitals succumb to these laws. Way out of context, it's not relevant here. So the third one is the right option in this case. Okay. So here it's talking about the goods and services tax, the GST. It's saying that it is the strongest instrument in the country for stemming the generation of black money. This has to be complemented with reform of political funding. Election Commission can mandate monthly publication of expenses at every entry level by every party, open to challenge by others, and ask parties to disclose the source of income to finance that expenditure. Okay, so it's mainly talking about how there can be more transparency within the system and transparency when you're talking about the funding and how it is, how parties are choosing to spend their money, and also how GST is a very strong component in bringing about this transparency. So, what this one first statement says that all the government bodies have information that relates to an updated assessment on the stock of black money. Now, had this been true, there wouldn't have been any need for the GST. Third one said it is practically impossible for the black money defaulters to escape from the clutches of goods and services tax. Now, when they're saying this, what they're assuming is that the goods and services tax is actually very strong, and that is the part that has also been mentioned in the question, that it is the strongest instrument in the country, and because it's the strongest instrument, it is obviously disincentivizing the defaulters to actually get away with committing tax frauds. So the third option is automatically implicit, and that makes, I mean, the second option, which says that only the third one is implicit, the right option. So again, a shorter question shouldn't take a lot of time. Okay. So here we're talking about Canadian researchers and mouse gut cells. What they're saying is that the researchers hope that the genetically modified gut cells will free diabetics from dependence on insulin injections. Diabetics fail to produce insulin, causing excessive levels of glucose in their blood. The genetically engineered mouse produces insulin. Genetically engineered mouse produces insulin in exact quantities required to balance out daily glucose fluctuations. Okay, so let's have a look at the assumptions, the possible assumptions. First one says insulin injection used by diabetics helps to maintain the sugar level in their bodies. The genetically modified mouse guts will alter the genetics of diabetics also. In diabetics, the daily glucose level is not maintained at the normal level. Mouse gut cells function in exactly same way as pancreas of human beings, which are responsible for glucose production. Now, just by a cursory glance, the most obvious one that if I take it to be true, if I take this assumption to be true, only the fourth one fits in, because this is the only one which is what the Canadians are basing their hopes on, which is that mouse gut cell will function in exactly the same ways as pancreas of human beings. Because what they're saying is, you take the mouse gut cells and you modify them, and then you use them for human treatment, right? So the main assumption at the core of this is, you're assuming that the mouse gut cells are also going to be working in a very similar way to that of the human pancreas, which are responsible for producing the glucose, right? So the fourth one very clearly is the right option here. It is the assumption which the researchers are basing their research on, right? Okay, so these type of questions now, they're going to be having two arguments, right? There will be a problem statement which will be given and followed by two arguments. One of them is a strong argument, one of them is a weak argument, or both of them could be strong, both of them could be weak. So you have to take them on a very case by case basis. Okay, the very crucial thing here is to not try to read both the arguments at one go. You take the first one first and you read it thoroughly, all right? Because within this argument, you have to think as a debater. If you are making a case, right? If you're making a certain argument, what are the points that you're backing your argument on? What is the logical reasoning behind it? And if there are any facts, then what is the impact of those facts in your argument, right? So only if it's strong, only in that case should you consider it a strong argument. Otherwise, it is not really a strong argument. So here the question is: should mutual funds be brought under strict government control? Okay. The arguments, the first one states that yes, that is one of the ways to protect the interest of the investors. Now, just by bringing mutual funds under government strict control, when you bring anything into government's control, it is automatically in a way putting sort of a stamp, or a thappa as we call it, uh, to the processes that are happening. Anything which is government certified is obviously reliable, right? That is how, that is why things like stamp papers or bond papers, they are government verified documents. So when we're talking about mutual funds being brought under the purview of strict government control, it is obviously done to protect this, to safeguard the interests and to protect the interests of the investors. So that is why the first option is logically, it makes sense, and it is a strong argument. Okay, now let's have a look at the second option. They're saying the strict government controls are likely to be counterproductive. Okay, now this is more of an assumption. It is based on an assumption, this statement. Okay, ignore the question mark here. The statement is based on an assumption that government controls have not yielded positive results. It's not yielded it's yielded counterproductive results, and that is why if they are brought into the government control, they are going to be there is going to be a negative effect. So that is why this one is not really a strong argument. Now, and the important thing to remember here is it's not about which argument is right or wrong. Okay, there are two sides to a coin, and both of the arguments could have their own proponents. The important thing is which one of them is a strong argument and which one of them is a weak argument. Okay, sometimes them, and it is that's why it's very important to keep your own personal biases out of these questions when you're reading them. You may be on one side of the on the one side of the argument, but so that is why you would have the natural tendency to sort of, you'll be inclined to select that one option, but that is not the correct way to go about it. That's not the smart way to go about it. So you have to be very objective here. You have to look at both sides of the coin. Whichever one is presenting stronger options is the one that you have to select. So here, very clearly, only argument one is strong, so we select the second option. Okay, so this may seem like a fairly simple question, but it's easy to get confused here. The problem statement is, should air travel be restricted to prevent air pollution? Okay, it's a very air travel and air pollution oriented question. So these are the two key aspects. Any arguments which do not take these two factors into account are obviously not strong arguments. So let's have a look at them one by one. First one says that yes, air pollution emitted from transportation contributes to smog and to poor air quality, which has negative impacts on the health and welfare of citizens. Now, from here to here, it might make sense, right? Because it is a very logical thing. But where the snag here is that it's talking about air pollution emitted from transportation. Very general. Here we are just talking about air travel, not traveling in general. Okay. So that is why it is a weak argument. It is not a strong argument because you've completely ignored the key element over here. Now the second argument says that yes, the sound produced by airplanes exceeds the natural hearing limit of people, which could permanently damage ears of those who are regularly exposed to it. Again, it is a right statement. It is a logical statement to make, but if you take the problem statement into consideration, it is nowhere talking about sound pollution. It is talking about should air travel be restricted to prevent air pollution. Okay, so this again is a weak argument. So we can safely select option 4. These kinds of questions are, once you get the hang of it, they're pretty easy to do. You just need to have a very, very, very objective mindset. Only then you can pretty easily crack these kind of questions. Okay. So this question says that should the government control salaries and limit the amount that people can earn? Okay. Government controlling the salaries to limit the amount people can earn. Argument one says that no, socialist states tend to deplete motivation of their citizens by giving equal salaries to all members of the state. Now, yeah, socialist states may not be given here, okay, but the important part is to look at what they're saying. They're saying that when you're giving equal salaries, which is a very communist or a socialist way of governance, where it does not support, inequality. It wants homogeneity across all levels of society. So when they're saying that giving equal salaries to all members of the state, right? So that means even if you're an exceptional performer, you will be getting the same salary as that of a very poor performer. So there is no incentive for you to actually perform well, right? There is equality in the society, of course, but the people with merit, they don't have any incentive to get ahead in life. Okay, so that is why it's saying no, that this when if you take if the government takes control of the salaries, it's not going to have a positive effect. So that is why it is a strong argument. Second one says that no, socialism leads to removal of competition from the states, which turns to dampen the economic growth. So now, again, it's along the same lines where it's saying that if you limit the amount that people can earn, right? If you're putting a tab on it, if you're controlling it, there is no incentive for industry as a whole to move ahead. There is no incentive for competition among the states, competition among companies, and that obviously has a very negative effect, because only when a company feels that it can grow, it can climb up the ladder, only then will it work harder, and then subsequently lead to economic growth. Right. So an interesting example is that of the erstwhile Soviet Union, which was as you may be knowing, it was a socialist state, it was a communist state, and due to the very strict government policies over there, where they were, they discouraged industry, they discouraged capitalism, and because of that, ultimately, what happened was that there was no innovation being done. There was a lot of there was no competition. There was no sense of incentive for anybody to perform well, and slowly it actually led to a eventual downturn. And then, as we all know, it eventually broke apart, the entire Soviet Union. So yeah, again, some trivia for you, but the answer here is that both the arguments are strong in this case. Okay. So this question is saying that should success of a business be judged by the amount of money the business makes? Okay, so the main agenda here is judging the success of the business, and the parameter that they're saying is the money the business makes. Okay, keep these two things important. These are the two important things you have to keep in mind. Now let's read the arguments. Yes, to be successful and remain in business, both profitability and growth are important and necessary for a company. These help it to survive and remain attractive to investors and analysts. So now here this argument is not really presenting a valid reason in considering the success of a business in accordance excuse me, in accordance with the amount of money that they're earning. They're referring the amount. This argument refers to the profitability and the growth part. Okay, it's not really talking about the revenue being generated, which is what amount of money the business makes. Essentially, that's what it means, right? So this one is not a strong argument. The second one says that yes, the interrelation of profitability and growth is illustrated by a basic operating principle that growth can best be evaluated by examining profit and sales. Again, this is talking about profit, talking about sales. It's not talking about the total amount of revenue that the company is generating, and it's talking more on the lines of interrelation of profitability and growth. Whereas the question is, should the success of a business be judged by the amount of money that the business makes? So again, this is not a strong argument, and we can select the fourth option. All right. So this is the last question for today. Uh, just take 10-15 seconds to go through it. Right. So here the question is that should there be capital punishment for those who are found guilty of rape charges? And the arguments being presented here are yes, this is the only way to eliminate such atrocities on women, and no, this will lead to more violence as culprits may even kill the rape victims. Right. So now again, in questions like this where there is an element of morality involved, it is very important to have a objective mindset and not be swayed by the opinions that are being given. These are just questions, and you need to look at them just as questions. Okay, so when we're talking about the first argument, when it's saying that yes, capital punishment should be there because that is the only way to eliminate such atrocities on women. So the assumption here at hand here is that if you give capital punishment to these offenders, to those found guilty of rape charges, then it will disincentivize them to actually carry out these actions in the future, and that will in turn lead to eliminating atrocities as culprits may even kill the rape victims, right? So now here what they're saying is that they are just guilty of rape charges as of now, okay, but if they're not given capital punishment, then they will lead then it will lead to more violence as the culprits may even try to kill the victims. Okay, so again, this also presents a strong case. Whether it is right or wrong, it's not for us to decide. It's not for anyone to decide at this case because it's just a question. So you have to look at it from a question-oriented point of view, from a debate point of view. That okay, the reason that has been given here, the opinion that has been given here, does it have a strong reasoning? And it does in this case. So option one and two both are strong, but you can't take both the options here, right? Because if you're saying you can't say yes and no, so the correct option to select here would be either argument one is strong or either argument two is strong, depending on whichever side you wish to take, the whichever side the hypothetical debater or lawyer is wishing to take. Because the question has been given here and there's two arguments, he can, depending on his reasoning, he can take either of the two. So that is why both these arguments are strong. And yeah, so with that we come to the end of this session. I don't think there's been many doubts here. Uh, yeah, I think it's about the 10th one only, which I think I've already answered. Yeah, so apart from this, just okay. Okay. Yeah, all right. So just a few tips in order to be acing verbal section. The most important thing here is to, number one is practice, obviously. The second is improving your speed of reading, because as I mentioned earlier, there's going to be a total of 22 questions and only 32 questions and only 22 minutes to answer it. That's less than a minute for each question. There's just 40 seconds. So only if you develop the habit of reading, you're going to be able to read fast. You're going to be able to cover more material and attempt these mostly all of these questions, because I think there's no negative marking. So the idea here is to attempt all of them, but attempt them right. And yeah, for any doubts, I think you can reach out. So thank you so much.